Dust Creek, on the western frontier in the year 1857. What if a silver ring carried not treasure, but the weight of generations? What if betrayal and love collided in a town already scarred by war? Could a boy step into the legacy his father died to protect? Could a mother's choice decide whether Dust Creek stands or falls? Stay with this story. Every answer leads to a deeper mystery. And tell me, if the silver chose you, would you carry it or let it go? Welcome to WestDream Tales, where forgotten frontiers, hidden legacies, and untold mysteries come alive. Every week, we bring you stories of courage, betrayal, and redemption from the Wild West tales that whisper through the desert wind and echo in the canyon walls. If you love mysteries, legends, and powerful storytelling, make sure to subscribe now and ring the bell so you won't miss the next ride into the unknown. The wind carried secrets in Dust Creek, whispers that danced through dry sagebrush and settled in the bones of those who knew how to listen. Mary Whitmore pulled her shawl tighter as she watched her son Eli chase shadows along the fence line, his boots kicking up dust clouds that caught the dying light. At 12, Eli moved with the careless grace of a boy who'd never known his father's weight. The silver ring hanging from a leather cord around his neck bounced against his chest, just another piece of his mother's mystery. Like the locked trunk under her bed and the way she sometimes stared toward the canyon as if expecting ghosts. That evening changed everything. Eli stumbled chasing a jackrabbit, his boot catching on a root. The cord snapped, the ring tumbled into the dust, and for one breathless moment, it pulsed with pale light like moonbeams trapped in metal. Mary's sharp intake of breath cut through the desert stillness. Eli. The boy looked up, puzzled by the urgency in her voice. The ring lay dark again, just silver catching starlight. But Mary's hands shook as she picked it up, remembering James pressing it into her palm with desperate fingers. Keep it safe. For him. For when he's ready. She'd carried that secret for 7 years, watching her son grow into his father's stubborn chin and gentle eyes. Now the ring had chosen its moment to wake up. That night, Mary sat at the kitchen table, the ring before her like an accusation. Eli appeared in his nightshirt, bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "Mama, you crying?" She wasn't not quite, but her eyes held the shine of tears fought back. "Sit with me, son." He slid onto the bench beside her, small shoulder warm against her arm. Mary turned the ring in her palm, feeling its weight multiply with memory. "Your father wore many faces," she began, her voice low. The town knew Sheriff James Whitmore fair, firm, not easily rattled, but he carried older stories, darker ones, from his time at Fort Mason. Eli leaned closer, drawn by the rare mention of his father's past. The Apache Wars were ending when James found something that shouldn't have been found, a sacred place hidden deep in the desert, silver worked by hands that knew its power, not wealth, but protection. Spirit silver, they called it. Her finger traced the ring's smooth surface. This was part of a larger collection, scattered when the cavalry came. James took only one piece, but even that was nearly too much. The silver chooses who can bear it, and it remembers every betrayal. Betrayal. Mary's jaw tightened. Jed Harper wore the same uniform as your father. They'd served together, saved each other's lives, but when Jed saw the silver, he saw only power to be taken, not responsibility to be carried. She told him about the fight in the cavern, gunshots echoing off stone walls while ancient spirits stirred in the darkness. How James escaped with the ring while Jed crawled away with a head full of greed and a map burned into his memory. When they hanged Jed for his crimes, his last words weren't madness like folks thought. He said, "You think killing me ends this. That ring doesn't belong to her. It never did. He meant me, son. And maybe he was right. Eli touched the ring with careful fingers. It warmed at his touch, not with fever, but with recognition. Then who does it belong to? Mary pulled him close, breathing in the desert dust and boy sweat smell of his hair. That's what we're going to find out. Outside, coyotes called across the valley, their voices threading through the darkness like silver through stone. The ring sat quiet between them, but both could feel it listening, waiting for whatever came with the dawn. 3 months passed in deceptive peace. Eli wore the ring tucked beneath his shirt, but sometimes Mary caught glimpses of its faint glow through the fabric, a reminder that their borrowed time was running short. The reckoning came on a Tuesday that started like any other. Riders approached Dust Creek in the heat of midday, their horses kicking up dust devils that danced in the still air. But these weren't the usual drifters or supply wagons. These men rode with purpose, their eyes fixed on the Whitmore house like compass needles finding north. Mary set down her washing and stepped onto the porch, one hand resting on the shotgun propped against the doorframe. Eli emerged from the barn, drawn by the sound of hooves and the sudden tension in the air. The lead rider dismounted with practiced ease. He was younger than Mary had expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair and eyes that held too much knowledge for his years. But when he smiled, she saw the ghost of another face, one that had haunted her dreams for 7 years. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, touching his hat brim. Name's Marcus Harper. I believe you knew my brother Jed. The words hit like a physical blow. Mary's grip tightened on the shotgun, but Marcus raised his hands in a gesture of peace. Easy now. I didn't come here for trouble. I came for what's rightfully mine. Nothing here belongs to you, Mary replied, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. Marcus's smile widened. That ring around your boy's neck tells a different story. Eli's hand moved instinctively to his chest, feeling the silver's sudden warmth through his shirt. The ring was responding to something, not danger exactly, but recognition. Like calling to My brother was a fool, Marcus continued, but he wasn't wrong about everything. That silver doesn't belong in farming hands. It's got a purpose bigger than protecting one family. He gestured to his men, and Mary saw what she'd missed before the careful way they positioned themselves, the professional ease with which they checked their weapons. These weren't desperate outlaws. They were soldiers, or had been once. The Apache called it spirit silver, Marcus said, his voice taking on the cadence of a man reciting scripture. But they only saw part of the truth. It's more than protection. It's power over the land itself, over the forces that sleep beneath our feet. Mary felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. You're talking nonsense. Am I? Marcus reached into his saddlebag and withdrew something that made Eli gasp. Another ring, silver like moonlight, but wrong, somehow colder, hungrier. It sat in Marcus's palm like a coiled snake, and when he held it up, Eli's ring responded with a pulse of heat that nearly burned his skin. Jed kept better records than you thought, Marcus said. Maps, measurements, even a few pieces he managed to acquire before his unfortunate end. This ring came from the same source as yours. Boy, same silver, same power, but it's been waiting for someone with the will to use it properly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mary felt the hair on her arms rise as an unnatural stillness settled over the valley. Even the wind held its breath. You have one day, Marcus said, swinging back onto his horse. Bring the ring to the old mission ruins at sunset tomorrow. Come alone, and we'll settle this like civilized folks. Otherwise... He gestured to his men, their implications clear. After they rode away, Dust Creek felt smaller somehow, as if the very air had been compressed by the weight of the threat. Mary and Eli sat on the porch steps, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears. 2 rings, Eli finally said. At least 2. Mary's voice was grim. Lord knows how many pieces that silver was broken into, or where they've ended up. That evening, they sought counsel from an unexpected source. Old Miguel lived in a cabin at the edge of town, a man whose Apache grandmother had given him eyes that saw deeper than most. Mary had never spoken to him about the ring, but as they approached his door, she realized he'd been waiting. The silver dreams, he said without preamble, ushering them inside. It calls to its own kind, yes, like wolves, howling to the moon. Eli nodded, his hand pressed to his chest, where the ring's warmth pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Miguel's weathered fingers touched the air above the ring without quite making contact. This piece remembers love. The other one. It tastes of hunger, of wanting to devour rather than protect. Can you tell us anything else? Mary asked. Miguel's eyes grew distant. The silver was never meant to be divided. Each piece carries memory of the whole, but incomplete memory leads to madness. Your ring seeks to heal, to reunite. The other seeks to consume, to gather all power to itself. He looked directly at Eli then, his gaze piercing. Tomorrow, you must choose not just which ring survives, but what kind of man you'll become. The silver will test your heart. Boy, it will offer you everything you think you want. As they walked home under stars that seemed dimmer than usual, Eli asked the question that had been haunting him since Marcus's visit. What if he's right? What if the ring doesn't belong to us? Mary stopped walking, turning to face her son in the pale moonlight. Your father asked me the same question once. The night before he died, he said maybe he'd been wrong to take it, wrong to keep it from its people. What did you tell him? I told him that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same. Sometimes you have to trust your heart over your head. She touched Eli's cheek with gentle fingers. The ring chose you, son, just like it chose your father. Just that has to mean something. But as they resumed walking, both of them wondered if choosing would be enough when sunset came tomorrow. The day of reckoning dawned red as blood, painting the desert in shades of copper and rust. Mary stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun climb toward its appointment with destiny, while Eli sat at the table, the ring heavy in his palm. I could come with you, Mary offered, not for the first time. He said, come alone. Eli's voice had deepened over these months of carrying his father's legacy, but it still cracked with the weight of what lay ahead. Since when do we trust the word of Harper men? Eli looked up, meeting his mother's eyes with a steadiness that reminded her painfully of James. Since we don't have a choice. The mission ruins lay 3 miles north of town, adobe walls crumbling back into the desert that had birthed them. Mary remembered when they'd still held services there, before the new church was built and the old ways were abandoned to wind and time. Now it served as a theater for older conflicts. Marcus was waiting when Eli arrived, standing among the broken stones like a dark apostle. His men remained mounted, forming a loose circle around the ruins. In the fading light, their faces looked carved from shadow. You came, Marcus said, genuinely pleased. That takes courage. Your father would be proud. You didn't know my father. Didn't I? Marcus withdrew the second ring, its surface gleaming with cold fire. Jed told me stories. Boy, how James would lie awake nights, staring at that ring, wondering if he'd stolen something holy. The doubt ate at him like acid. Eli felt his own ring pulse against his palm, warm as living flesh. He kept it safe. That's what matters. Safe. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Look around you. This land is dying. Too many droughts, too many failed harvests, Too many good people giving up and moving on. The silver could change that. It could bring life back to places like Dust Creek. He held up his ring, and the air around it seemed to shimmer with potential. Together, these pieces could do more than protect a single family. They could transform a whole territory. Into what? Into something worthy of the power they hold. The temperature plummeted as both rings began to pulse in earnest, their light painting the ruins in stark contrasts of silver and black. Eli felt the pull immediately, not just from his own ring, but from Marcus's as well. They wanted to be together, to be whole again. But there was something else in that pull, something hungry and cold that made Eli's skin crawl. "You feel it too," Marcus said, stepping closer. The silver recognizes blood. Boy, Harper blood and Whitmore blood, mixed together in that cavern 7 years ago. When Jed fought your father, their conflict was sealed into the metal itself. We're bound to this, you and I, bound to finish what they started. Eli backed away, but the ring's pull grew stronger with each step. Around the ruins, the air began to thicken, taking on shapes that weren't quite human but weren't quite wind either. The Guardians, Marcus breathed, his eyes wide with anticipation. They're coming. But when the spirits materialized, they didn't choose sides. Instead, they surrounded both Eli and Marcus, their forms flickering between protection and threat. Eli could feel their confusion, two pieces of their sacred silver, both calling for unity, both carried by bloodlines stained with conflict. "Give me your ring," Marcus demanded, his voice taking on an edge of desperation. "Let me reunite them. Let me fix what our fathers broke." For a moment, Eli wavered. The pull was almost irresistible now, and part of him, a deep, tired part, wanted nothing more than to hand over the burden he'd never asked to carry. Then he heard his mother's voice, not from memory, but from somewhere much closer. Mary emerged from behind a fallen wall, shotgun in her hands, her face set with grim determination. "Step away from my son." Marcus spun, his ring flaring with sudden anger. "I told him to come alone." "Since when do we trust the word of Harper men?" Mary replied, echoing her earlier words. The Guardians stirred, their forms growing more solid as the conflict intensified. Eli could see faces in their shifting shapes, now Apache warriors, but also others, men who died in the desert, their spirits drawn to the silver's call. Among them, achingly familiar, was the ghost of James Whitmore. "Dad," Eli whispered. James's spirit turned toward his son, his face filled with love and regret in equal measure. When he spoke, his words seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The silver was never meant to choose between us, son. It was meant to remind us what we already knew." "What's that?" "That love is stronger than legacy. That protecting what matters is worth more than claiming what doesn't," Marcus snarled, raising his ring high. "Enough sentiment. The silver belongs to those strong enough to master it." He lunged toward Eli, his ring blazing with cold fire. But as he moved, the Guardians finally made their choice. They flowed around Eli and Mary like a river of light, while pressing against Marcus like an unyielding wall. The collision sent shockwaves through the ruins. Marcus screamed as his ring turned molten in his grasp, the corrupted silver rejecting him just as it had rejected his brother years before. He fell to his knees, his hand smoking, his ring cracking apart like an egg. The pieces scattered into the dust, their light fading to nothing. Eli's ring pulsed once, warmly, then settled into quiet contentment. The Guardians began to fade, but James's spirit lingered a moment longer. "You chose well, son, both of you." As the ghosts dissolved back into desert wind, Mary helped Marcus to his feet. His hand was badly burned, but he'd live. His men, shaken by what they'd witnessed, made no move to continue the fight. It's over, Mary told him quietly. The silver has spoken. Honor that if you've got any Harper pride left. Marcus looked at the scattered pieces of his ring, then at Eli's face, young, determined, unbroken. Finally, he nodded. It's over, he agreed. As his men rode away, Eli and Mary stood among the ruins, watching the last light fade from the western sky. The ring at Eli's chest was quiet now, just silver and memory. What happens next? He asked. Mary smiled, pulling him close. Next, we go home. We live our lives. We remember what your father taught us, that some things are worth protecting, even when they cost us everything. They walked back toward Dust Creek under stars that seemed brighter than before, carrying their small piece of silver and the larger piece of wisdom it had taught them. Behind them, the desert wind whispered through the ruins, singing old songs of love and loss and the eternal struggle between what we want and what we need. 2 years passed in Dust Creek, like water finding its level steady, inevitable, changed by what had come before. Eli grew into his father's height, but kept his mother's thoughtful eyes, and the ring settled into being just another part of him, warm against his chest like a second heartbeat. Mary aged more gracefully now that the weight of secrets had lifted. She could speak of James without that sharp intake of breath, could tell stories of their courtship, while Eli rolled his eyes in good-natured embarrassment. The town itself seemed easier somehow, as if removing the Harper threat had loosened something that had been wound too tight. But the desert keeps its own schedule, and on a morning when autumn painted the mesas gold, 3 Apache riders appeared at the edge of town. They came not as warriors, but as elders, their faces lined with years and wisdom, their horses walking with the patience of those who carried important messages. The leader, a woman whose gray hair was braided with silver threads, asked to speak with the keeper of the spirit silver. Mary met them in the town square, Eli at her side. A small crowd gathered. Curious but respectful, everyone in Dust Creek had heard whispered versions of what happened at the mission ruins. I am Elena Yazzie, the elder said, her English careful but clear. My grandmother's grandmother helped forge that silver your boy carries. Eli's hand moved instinctively to his chest, feeling the ring's familiar warmth. We heard about the Harper man, Elena continued. How the silver burned him when he tried to use it for wrong purposes. This is as it should be. Mary stepped forward slightly. Did we do something wrong by keeping it? Elena's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. Wrong. No. Your husband saved that piece when others would have melted it down for coins. Your son proved himself worthy when he could have chosen power over protection. But the pause stretched like a held breath. But the silver was never meant to be alone. It calls to its missing pieces. Yes, dreams of being whole again. Eli nodded slowly. He'd felt it sometimes, especially at night, a restless pulling, like homesickness for a place he'd never seen. Elena reached into a leather pouch at her waist and withdrew something that made Mary gasp. Another piece of silver. Not a ring, but a bracelet, worked with the same impossible delicacy as Eli's ring. This piece came home to us 5 winters ago, Elena explained. A trader brought it, said he'd won it from a cavalry officer in a card game. We knew it belonged with its family. She held up the bracelet, and immediately Eli's ring began to pulse with warm light. The 2 pieces of silver seemed to sing to each other, harmonies only they could hear. We cannot force the choice, Elena said, looking directly at Eli. The silver must decide, but if you are willing, we would complete the circle. Not to take your protection, but to strengthen it. Mary felt a familiar fear rise in her throat. What would that mean for Eli? It means he would no longer carry the burden alone. The silver would be shared among those who proved themselves worthy Apache and white alike. It means the healing could begin. That evening, the three elders made camp by the river, waiting for Eli's decision. The boy himself couldn't sleep, walking restlessly around the house while the ring pulsed against his chest like an excited heart. "I can feel them," he told Mary as they sat on the porch steps. "The other pieces. They're scattered all over, some lost, some hidden, some carried by people who don't even know what they have." "How many?" "7 altogether. I think maybe 8. They're calling to each other, wanting to come home." Mary studied her son's face in the moonlight, seeing shadows of the man he was becoming. "What do you want to do?" Eli was quiet for a long time, listening to the desert wind and the distant sound of the Apache camp's fire crackling by the water. Finally, he spoke. "Dad took the ring to keep it safe. But maybe keeping it hidden isn't the same as keeping it safe anymore. Maybe it's time to trust other people the way Elena's people are trusting us." The next morning brought their answer. Eli approached the Apache camp, carrying his ring openly, the silver warm and eager in his palm. Elena smiled and extended her bracelet toward him. When the two pieces touched, the world exploded into light. Not painful light, but the warm golden glow of sunrise over endless desert, the silver radiance of moonbeams on still water. Mary saw visions in that light, James as a young soldier, the Apache craftsman who'd first worked the silver, generations of guardians and protectors stretching back to the beginning of memory. And in the center of it all, she saw the truth. The silver had never been about ownership. It had always been about connection between past and present, between different peoples, between the small daily acts of love and the larger forces that shaped the world. When the light faded, Eli wore both the ring and the bracelet, but their weight felt lighter somehow. Elena nodded approvingly. "Now the real work begins," she said, finding the other pieces, bringing them home, healing what was broken. Eli looked at his mother, seeing his own excitement reflected in her eyes. "A quest, a responsibility," Elena corrected gently. "But yes, an adventure too." As the Apache elders prepared to leave, Elena pulled Mary aside. "Your husband made a choice to protect rather than profit. Your son has chosen to share rather than hoard. This is why the silver chose your family, not because you are perfect, but because you understand what matters." Mary watched Eli say goodbye to the elders, his young face serious with newfound purpose. The ring and bracelet caught the morning sun, throwing tiny rainbows across his shirt. "How long will it take?" Mary asked, finding all the pieces. Elena shrugged. "Years, maybe. A lifetime, perhaps. But time moves differently when you're doing the right work." As the riders disappeared into the desert haze, Eli turned to his mother with eyes bright with possibility. "When do we start?" Mary smiled, remembering James's last words to her. "Keep it safe." For him, she'd kept it safe. And now, it was time to let it grow. "We start with breakfast," she said practically. "Then we pack. And then we see where the silver wants to go." The ring pulsed once, warmly, as if in agreement. 10 years had passed since Eli first felt the silver's call, and now he rode into Dust Creek with dust on his boots and stories in his eyes. The ring and bracelet had been joined by 3 more pieces over the years, a pendant from a trader in Santa Fe, a belt buckle from a reformed outlaw in Colorado, and a small medallion that had been gathering dust in a Mexican church for decades. Each reunion had brought visions, memories, and a deeper understanding of what the silver truly was: not treasure, but medicine, not power, but responsibility. Mary waited on the familiar porch, her hair now completely silver, but her smile unchanged. At 32, Eli carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd found his purpose. But when he saw his mother, he still moved with the eager steps of the boy who'd once chased rabbits along these fences. "How many left?" Mary asked as they embraced. "2, maybe 3. They're close now. I can feel them pulling toward each other like lodestones." That evening, as desert stars wheeled overhead, Eli showed his mother the changes the silver had brought. The 5 pieces had begun to merge, not physically but spiritually, their separate lights blending into something larger and more complex. When he held them together, the air around his hands shimmered with potential. "Elena was right," he said. "It's not just about collecting them. Each piece has taught me something different about protection, about healing, about the connections between all living things." Mary nodded, seeing in her son's face the echo of his father's dedication tempered by hard-won wisdom. "And the dreams, clearer every night. I can see where the last pieces want to go, who they're meant to help. There's a Navajo family in Arizona whose daughter is sick. One piece calls to her. And somewhere in California, a piece waits in an old Spanish mission, calling to anyone with eyes to see." They talked long into the night, sharing stories of the decade that had passed. Mary had married again a kind widower named Thomas, who treated Eli like his own son and never asked about the silver's glow on clear nights. Dust Creek had grown into a proper town, with a school and a doctor and regular mail service from the territorial capital. But some things remained constant. The desert still whispered secrets to those who knew how to listen. The Apache and white settlers had found an uneasy but genuine peace, bonded by shared respect for the land they all called home. And in the center of it all, the Whitmore house still stood as a place where mysteries were welcome and stories were sacred. The final piece revealed itself sooner than expected. 3 days after Eli's return, a stranger rode into town, not the usual drifter or merchant, but a well-dressed Mexican gentleman with eyes that held depths of sorrow. He introduced himself as Don Carlos Mendoza and asked, with careful politeness, to speak with El Guardián de la Plata Sagrada, the guardian of the sacred silver. Eli met him at the saloon, aware of curious eyes from every corner of the room. Don Carlos ordered whiskey but didn't drink it, instead studying Eli's face with the intensity of a man seeing a ghost. "You have the eyes of your father," he said finally. Mary, who had joined them despite Eli's protests that he could handle this alone, felt her heart skip. "You knew James, briefly, during the war." Don Carlos's voice carried the weight of old regrets. "I was. Not on the same side as your husband, but in war, enemies sometimes share more than friends ever do." He reached into his vest and withdrew a silver chain, its links so fine they seemed spun from moonbeams. At its center hung a cross, worked with the same impossible artistry as Eli's other pieces. The moment it appeared, every piece of silver on Eli's body began to sing. "I took this from a dead Apache warrior." Don Carlos continued, his voice heavy with shame. "I was young, greedy, stupid. I thought it was just valuable metal. But it has haunted my family for 20 years. My wife died in childbirth. My sons fell to fever. My lands turned to dust." He held up the cross, and in its light, his face looked haggard, aged beyond his years. "I came north looking for answers, following stories about a young man who gathered pieces of cursed silver. When I heard you were in Dust Creek, I knew this was meant for you." Eli extended his hands, and when Don Carlos placed the cross in his palms, the world exploded into the familiar golden light. But this time, the vision was different, darker, tinged with grief and loss, and the bitter taste of stolen things finally returning home. Eli saw the warrior who had first worn the cross, saw his death in a nameless skirmish, saw Don Carlos as a terrified young soldier taking what didn't belong to him, but he also saw deeper the decades of guilt, the slow recognition that some debts can only be paid with truth. When the light faded, Don Carlos was weeping. "I'm sorry," he whispered in a "I'm so sorry." Eli looked at the complete silver collection in his hands, 6 pieces that pulsed with unified light, their separate purposes now merged into something whole and holy. The weight was enormous, but somehow lighter than carrying even one piece alone had been. "The silver doesn't hold grudges," Eli said gently. "It forgives. It heals. That's what it was made for." Don Carlos stayed in Dust Creek for a week, sharing meals with the Whitmores and finding, perhaps for the first time in decades, something approaching peace. When he left, he carried no silver but seemed somehow brighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his soul. Elena Yazzie arrived 3 days later with a small delegation of elders from 3 different tribes. They came not to reclaim the silver, but to witness its return to wholeness. The ceremony took place at sunset in the old mission ruins, where Marcus Harper had once made his desperate grab for power. But now the crumbling walls seemed less like a monument to failure and more like a testament to the way broken things could still hold beauty. Eli stood in the center of the circle, the 6 pieces of silver arranged in his palms like fallen stars. Around him, Apache and Mexican and white faces reflected the growing light, all unified in wonder. "What happens now?" Mary asked Elena. The elder woman smiled. "Now it begins again. The silver returns to the earth, but its protection remains with those who proved worthy to carry it. Your son will pass it on when his time comes, as will his children, as will theirs. Not the silver itself, the wisdom, the responsibility, the understanding that we are all connected past and present, Apache and white, the living and the dead." Elena placed a weathered hand on Mary's shoulder. "This is what your husband died protecting. Not metal, but memory. Not treasure, but truth." As the sun touched the horizon, Eli opened his hands. The silver pieces rose into the air, spinning slowly, their light growing brighter and brighter until the entire ruins were bathed in radiance. Then, like a gentle rain, the light settled into everything: the stones, the earth, the people gathered in witness. The silver itself was gone, dissolved back into the elements that had birthed it, but its essence remained, woven now into the very fabric of the place they all called home. Eli felt the absence like a missing heartbeat, but also the presence, the warm certainty that he carried within himself everything the silver had taught him about love, protection, and the sacred responsibility of guardianship. As the gathered people began to disperse, sharing quiet words and gentle touches, Mary walked to her son's side. "Any regrets?" she asked. Eli looked around at the faces surrounding them. Elena's serene smile, Don Carlos's newfound peace, the curious wonder of children who had witnessed something beyond their understanding, but not beyond their hearts. "None," he said. "This is what Dad always wanted. This is what the silver was really for." They walked home together under stars that seemed brighter than before, carrying no silver but bearing its legacy in their hearts. Behind them, the desert wind whispered through the ruins, singing old songs of connection and new songs of hope. The ring of Dust Creek was complete at last, not in silver but in spirit, not in possession but in understanding. And in the years that followed, that understanding spread like ripples in still water, touching lives and healing wounds in ways that no amount of precious metal ever could. The silver had returned to the earth, but its true treasure, the bond between all who called this land home, would endure as long as memory itself. This was another journey into the heart of the frontier, told here at WestDream Tales. If this story stirred your curiosity, leave a comment. What would you have done if the silver chose you? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because more tales of Dust Creek and beyond are waiting just over the horizon. Until next time, keep your lantern lit and your heart open to the whispers of the West.